I'm going to show you how to use REST and Orchestrator. Let's get started. Hi everyone, I'm Watrous from VVork. If this is your first time here and you want to learn about automating, programming, and monitoring in VMware environments, you're in the right place. This is part 10 in a 10-part video series in which we're exploring how to make REST API calls. Here in part 10, we're going to be looking specifically at Orchestrator. In the previous video, we created a workflow that was able to perform a REST operation to get one joke. We're going to do things more complex this time around. We're going to get 10 jokes, and as a result, the JSON data that we get back is going to be more complex. So the parsing is going to be a bit more challenging here. Now, even though we're getting 10 jokes, this next workflow is pretty similar to the one that we just created called get one joke. So I'm going to start by duplicating get one joke. All right, first thing I want to do with this new copy is to change its name. So we're going to go ahead and open. We're going to change the name to get 10 jokes. And then we're going to go take a look at the schema. You'll recall when I created the parse JSON schema, I did it a little bit intentionally inconsistently. When I wrote the code for that, I ended up having one output of that schema element with a descriptive name called joke type. And I set its value to the local variable called type. On the other hand, these other three outputs called setup, punchline, and ID, I intentionally named them the same thing as the internal variable, which helped me to avoid typing lines like line 13. But between you and me, I would much rather be explicit here, have my variables be clear, and actually call them what I want to call them. So joke setup is going to be my output, and the local variable is still going to be called setup. I'll do the same thing for joke punchline and joke ID. Joke ID is going to be equal to ID. Again, right now I do not have outputs with those names, so I'm going to go do a little bit of swapping around here. I'm going to go back to variables where you can see I have those three variables that I'm using as outputs. I'm going to change their names. I don't want this one to be called ID. I want it to be called joke ID. Continuing onwards here, the punchline, we're going to call that variable joke punchline. And then similarly for the setup, the joke setup variable, let's give it a more explicitly name. So now my variables are more descriptive, which I like. But going back to the schema, let's just make certain that the binding is set up correctly here. These names are not quite right. So I'm going to delete these last three outputs and recreate them. All right, so recreating them, we also are going to have joke.id, joke.setup, joke.punchline. I already have those variables, so I don't need to create new ones. I just need to select them. So let's find them here. So the first one I'm going to bring in, I've got joke type. Why don't we do joke ID next? Where's joke ID hiding? There's joke ID. We'll do joke punchline. Again, I already have a variable called joke punchline. And one more. This time it's going to be joke setup. Actually, I meant to do setup first, but the order here doesn't matter. All right, now that I've done that, if I go over to the scripting tab, you'll notice that our outputs are now color-coded, and I'm just double-checking here. Everything looks pretty darn good. So again, I've got internal local variables called type, setup, punchline, and ID, but I'm sending their values back to the outer workflow by using outputs called joke type, joke setup, and so forth. So everything I just did there was not for the purposes of illustrating anything about REST. I just wanted to clean up that part of this particular workflow. So let's get back to the REST portion of this video. This code is great if what we're trying to do is to get one joke. But as we saw earlier, our API, our joke server API, allows us to say things such as random_10. So whereas if I say random joke or random1, if I say random joke, notice what I'm getting back is JSON formatted data. And in this specific case, what I'm getting back is an object. Notice that the first and last character are curly braces. That means that this JSON data that's been returned is an object. At the top level of any JSON, you're either going to be looking at an object or an array. If we're going to get 10 jokes, we're going to need to parse up an array because each array entry is going to be a separate joke. If we're doing a operation such as get 10 random jokes, you'll notice that we're getting back an array of objects. So notice the first and last characters are square brackets because this is an array. So our code's going to need to change a little bit here. So this code works great if the JSON data is an object, but this is not going to work if we're working with an array. So let's fix this code. All right, the first thing I'm going to do, this step's not necessary, but why don't we add a server.log to tell us the length of the jokes array. And speaking of which, that's what we're getting back this time. We're not getting back a single joke. We're going to get back an array of jokes. So if we want to know how many jokes there are in that array, we're going to say, give us the jokes.length or count or whatever you want to call it. So this is going to log the number of jokes that we got. And we expect the value to be 10. Now, these variable names here are fine for storing the type, the setup, the punchline, the ID of each joke one at a time, but we can't stick all the joke punchlines into one variable. So we're going to need to iterate over the array. To iterate over the array, we could use a good old for loop. So how about for, let's define a new variable. This will be our counter variable for I equals 0. So this will start us out looking at the first element in the array, jokes array. Then we'll say each time we go through the loop, the way we know when to get out of the loop is when jokes.length is greater than our counter variable, or to say that in reverse, if so long as the counter variable I is less than the length of the array, then we still have more jokes to process. And we'll increment the I variable, which will eventually get us out of the loop. Now, this is a loop, so let me type my syntactical sugar here. I need an open curly brace, and I need a closed curly brace. So I've got my loop, and I'm going to pretty it up a bit here. Now that I've prettied up my code, let me comment out lines 19 and onwards. We can talk about lines 19 and onwards here in a moment, but for the time being, let's comment those out. All right, so lines 5 through 16 are the core of our looping code. And this code is darn near correct, but we need to change what used to be a scalar joke variable. We changed its name to joke, so we need to change it down below. So jokes.type, jokes.setup, jokes.punchline, and jokes.id is the right idea. But again, jokes is an array, so we need to index into that array. And now we have code that will iterate across all 10 jokes in our REST server response. Well, why don't we save this and then we'll run it. So when we run the workflow, this go around, you'll notice it takes longer, but even so, it generates 10 jokes rather quickly here. If we go to our logs tab, now as you can see, we've gotten a bit of a surprise here. It says that the length property's not defined, but why is that? If you'd like to debug this on your own, go ahead and hit pause and think about this, but I'll show you what's going on here. So length is the length of the array. So how many items are in that array? And we got back undefined. So something squirrely is going on here. Let's go look at our workflow again real closely this time. So in our workflow called get 10 jokes, you'll recall that we did get 10 jokes by copying get 1 joke. So anything that we haven't changed here is still looking at 1 joke. So let's go to the schema, and we have here this generically labeled schema element called invoke a REST operation, but we know that what it was doing is calling our REST operation to get how many jokes? If you said 10, remember, this is just a copy of the other workflow. Our REST operation that we're calling isn't getting 10 jokes, it's just getting 1 joke. If you go look at the workflow run and look at the contents of this variable, you'll see that it's pointing to our REST operation that we defined that gets 1 joke. So we need to figure out, again, I'll encourage you to hit pause here to see if you can think this through, but how are we going to teach this workflow, or for that matter, how are we going to teach Orchestrator how to get 10 jokes? Well, let's, I've already saved, let's close and go back to our tree view. Again, trying to encourage you to figure this out on your own. Which of these workflows do we need to call in order to teach Orchestrator how to get 10 jokes? Well, to get 10 jokes, or for that matter, 1 joke or whatever, we simply need to add a new REST operation. So we're going to click on Add a REST operation, and we'll run this workflow. Now, whether you're doing 1 joke or 10 jokes, we're going to use the same REST server. So we choose joke server. And our name for this REST operation that we're adding is going to be pretty similar. So we'll call this one get 10 jokes. Where we need to type something different is right here. We don't want 1 random joke. We want 10 random jokes. So we've added a new operation that's going to get 10 jokes. Let's click run. Now we've got that new operation defined. Now if we go back to our new workflow, we have the potential to call that new REST operation, but our invoke a REST operation schema element is still calling the other REST operation. We need to change this thing's value. So REST operation is a variable. Let's go find it. Again, if we expand here, we can see that it's calling get 1 joke. That's not what we want. So we're going to click on REST operation, and this time we're going to clear. We don't want 1 joke, we want 10 jokes. So we're going to clear here. We're going to click value, and we're going to browse the tree down to our new get 10 jokes REST operation. We'll select that. We'll click save. Once again, we'll click save. And why not one more time, click save. Now if we run the workflow, again, it runs, it takes a little bit. And now when we go to the logs tab and take a look at what we see, now we're not getting that length undefined error message. Again, because we were calling the older REST operation, we were only getting 1 joke, and crucially, we weren't not getting back an array in the JSON data. We were getting back an object, which threw our line of code off, the line of code that's supposed to log the length. So length is now functioning correctly. We got back an array. It's got 10 items in it. The next 4 lines here are one joke. So joke number 49 is, why did chicken coops only have 2 doors? You can read the punchline yourself. And you can also scroll down through here and see the next 4 lines is the next joke, and the next joke, and the next joke. So our log has the information that we wanted back from the REST server. We've now got 10 jokes, but you'll notice that our variables, let me expand here, our variables has the response body with all the 10 different jokes, but in the previous video, we set up some variables called joke type, joke ID, joke setup, and joke punchline. Those were scalar strings. They can only store one value. If you wanted the parse JSON schema element to return an array, or to return all the jokes, all the punchlines, all the setups, and so forth, you would need to redefine these 4 variables as arrays. And then furthermore, in the code itself, in parse JSON, the code itself would not wait till it was out of the loop to set the values in the array. It would need to do so within the loop. Now I'm going to leave that as an exercise to you, the viewer, if you'd like to figure that out. That's not related to REST, so I'm not going to go down that path. But ideally, what I've done with this video is to show you how to add multiple REST operations. I've shown you why to add multiple REST operations, but the crucial thing I really wanted to dig into in this particular video is, how are you going to handle more and more complex data that you're getting back from these REST operations that you're calling? The key thing that's going to kick off any effort to parse the JSON data, the key thing that you got to know right from the get-go is that JSON data might be returning a object, or it might be returning an array at the top level. Join me in the next video as we continue our exploration into REST and Orchestrator.